Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video from my 1/6 scale M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman tank. Since the last video update, a ton of progress has been made to the model on basically every location. This would include the completion of the lower hull, the fleshing out detailing on the upper hull, and even the turret has had some major revisions and progress made to it. Trying to condense all of this information in one video is definitely going to be problematic, so we're going to go ahead and cut this up into 3 pieces. Which, by the way, is good news for you, the viewer, because you're not going to have to wait long for new videos to be posted. In this video here, we're going to be focusing primarily on the 3D printed detail upgrades that have been added to the superstructure here, and many of these detail parts are brand new, hot off the press, and some of them have been on the catalog for some time, and well, this is going to be one of the first usage of many of these components on my own personal build. We're going to be deep diving into these parts as well as showing their assembly and many of the detail features that they do offer. In part 2, we're going to be going ahead and actually installing everything to the tank itself, and also some of the revisions that were required in order to get these components fitted to this model. And then part 3 is going to be focusing on the turret, and that's going to be a whole can of worms that I really look forward to getting into with the deep dive and doing the editing on. But let's go ahead, pace ourselves. Let's go ahead and kick this video off with starting with the actual detail components themselves. Kicking this video off takes us to a bunch of new detail components that have freshly arrived from the printer that were definitely needed in order to get the model progressed past the point we saw it in the previous video. Which brings us around to the components that we have here on the table, which are the 1/6 scale ECA 3D printed M4A3 rear engine hatch set. These components here are very interesting for me to actually use because this is one of those items that were designed quite some time ago and were just ones that I never had an opportunity to actually use on my own personal builds, but have been seen on the channel previously on another build. It's also interesting to point out that generally on this channel, or specifically in this video series, when I'm talking about older items that have been on the catalog for quite some time, I'm usually talking about components that were made in cast resin. However, these here are the standouts because this set here has been on the catalog now for over 10 years. I believe I originally had these components designed back in the year 2013, maybe 14 or so. Which means these things have been on the catalog now for a literal decade, and also these components here have the honor of being the very first 1/6 scale 3D printed, well, anything to be offered on the EastCoastArmory.com catalog. When these components were originally designed, I was still doing cast resin the old-fashioned way, where I make the components by hand, I go ahead and make molds in them, cast the parts, or make the parts out of hand-bent and crafted metal items. Well, these things here were the ones that broke the ice and were the first 3D printed parts that have been designed, and they basically kind of set the mold on what was to come in the years to come. And as I mentioned before, these components here have been seen on the channel in the past, and if anyone's an old school viewer and fan of the channel, you know exactly what build that would be, which is the Dragon 1/6 scale M4A3 commission build series that I built again going on 10 years ago now. These components here were specifically designed to improve that model, and well, here we are finally 10 years later, and I finally have the opportunity to use them on one of my own personal builds. So it took me a little bit later than sooner to get to it, but either way, the pieces are just as good now as they were when they were originally crafted all those years ago. With the origin story out of the way, let's go ahead and actually dig into what these components are and what they give you. So what we have here again are the engine grill sections for the M4A3 Sherman. And you'll notice that we have a left and right hand hatch, as well as a set of hinges and nails to give you the hinge pins. What is not seen on the table that is included with the sets are some M3 fasteners for the fastener location holes that we see here on the outer extremities. Starting with the hatch itself, like I said before, the hatch is a mirror image, so there is a right and left hand specific, and obviously as you can see, the hatch is fully detailed with both exterior and interior detailing. And also, which would eventually come to be a staple on the ECA 3D printed items, everything is built into a single 3D print. So no assembly is required on the grill itself outside of making sure that the hinges are secured to the model. That's as well as maybe the hatch wall being revised. Other than that, the actual hinge or the hatch itself has zero construction that is necessary. Starting with the external detailing takes us to the frame. The frame itself is the correct shape and also has the scale thickness. Found on the external portions are the lift handles, which are integrally printed on along with their weld beads. The fastener location holes are also integrally found in case, again, you actually want to use a real fastener to strap this thing to the rear deck of the vehicle. And we have the hinge work that has the appropriate geometry, the welds, and the pieces are, again, printed hollow. And that brings us now to the most important aspect of the grills, which are the grills themselves. And you can see that the grills are very, very, very finely rendered out. Note that the slats are very thin, and they are ridiculously numerous. And the way you see it here is exactly how they would look like on a real M4A3 Sherman. A lot of plastic models out there tend to get this wrong, where they have the slats being less numerous and also much larger, and that is just inaccurate. If you've ever seen a real M4A3, this is what the grills will look like. In fact, for the longest period of time, and I think this may still be true today, these grills here are still the most accurate rendition of an M4A3 grill work on the market in basically any scale. So that's something that I think is still relevant today. There have been a lot of new super kits on the market as of late, but from what I remember and also from what I've seen with pictures online, these ones here still really more or less get the job and get it spot on compared to the other examples. Back to the components here. On that note, this takes us to what would normally be seen on many models as just 3 solid bars, but on the real vehicle, they're just weld beads. No more, no less. Just 3 weld beads that go across the center section over here to unite all these pieces, keeping them united and joined, and also to give them a little bit more rigidity. On that note, there's also 2 more weld beads on either end here to help weld these parts to the frame itself. As for the thinness of the parts, as you can see, they are so finely packed in with each other that getting visibility through the grills is quite difficult, which again is true to form to the real one. If I go ahead and move my hand back here, hopefully you get to see some mooring happening. And again, this is just shows you exactly what these pieces or how they would be represented on the real one. Also, as a little piece of ECA lore, these components here were the very first components to have the integrally 3D printed on Caterpillar weld that we see on all of my 3D prints and components in every scale that I work in, and it's found on basically every time I bring something new to the channel. But here was actually ground zero and how that was actually figured out and how to render that. And that wraps up the exterior portion, and this brings us to my favorite aspect, the interior portion. So the interior has a lot more going on than most people tend to imagine. You see a big engine hatch like this, you just think there's some grills and that's the end of it. But that's not the case. On the real M4A3, we have these very large and distinctive ducts found in these sections here, and these are used to funnel air into the radiators. Remember how the engine bay is on the M4A3, where on the rear portion of the hull, there are those 2 giant fans that have 2 giant radiators behind them, and then there's that rear duct area that the wind gets blown out and exits from. Well, to help make the airflow more efficient, we have these air ducts over here, and air just gets drawn in and then just gets propelled into the radiators in a much more easily done manner. And the way this is done is with these, again, these giant ducts that we have right here and here. On the topic of the ducts, for the longest period of time on the ECA catalog, I used to produce these out of sheet metal, and these were bent, soldered together, and were sold off in that format. Those have been retired long ago when these components here made it to the catalog. The old sheet metal tin ones were retired, and those have been put out to pasture eons ago. However, their legacy still lives on because the templates that were used to create those were literally the same ones used to build these ones here. I just scanned them, and from there, me and the designer who I had at the time, because I did not design these in CAD. I didn't know how to use CAD at the time, so I actually had a guy I worked with in order to design these sets, and that's how they came about to be. And then finally, I'm like, let me go and get into the 3D printed racket myself, and trial and error later, here we are. But anyway, with stuff like this, but that's going to be talked about later in the video. All right, so these parts have a lineage back to the sheet metal ones, because the sheet metal ones I basically perfected. The geometry on them is exactly what they need to be. And also, in addition to that, we have a rigidity brace that's found on the leading edge here, and he creates this little well found in this area. More likely, I would not be surprised if water would accumulate in this section over here if this thing gets wet or if it's in a rainstorm, but I guess there is a drainage system on the bottom of the Sherman in the engine bay to deal with that, but that's a topic for preventive maintenance. Anyway, back to the components. This now brings us back to the slats, and as you can see, the slats, like I said before, are very misleading. If you look at this on the outside, you'll think they're either bar stock or something, but they're actually quite substantial in width, as you can see here. They descend down past the engine hatch in the way that you see represented on this component. And once everything is painted and weathered, these pieces will definitely look the part and will be a huge focal point on this model. Even though it doesn't have any interior detailing, the detailed engine hatches are definitely one that still looks good either way. The next thing to mention on the sets are, again, the hinges. Like I stated before, basically everything is integrally built into the hatches themselves. So the hinges are, what you see is what you get. We have 4 hinges, they have the correct geometry, and they have some well-be detailing on them as well. The pieces, of course, are printed hollow and are ready for installation and assembly from the get-go. The only thing you have to do is snip off the little sprue there, clean it off, and properly mount to the model. From the engine grills, takes us to another component that has been on the catalog now for a little while and has also been seen on several other YouTube videos in the past, namely new product announcement videos, and that here is the ECA 3D printed M4A3 fuel filler spout set. And these components here are not brand spanking new. They've been on the catalog now for about maybe a year, 2 years at that. But again, first time I actually get a chance to use these bloody things. So that feels really great. The components are offered again on the catalog in several different configurations. We have here the complete set that has the external and interior detailing. We also have sets for different options. This one with this little fastener here on this cap and without. And there are basically a cap for every type of Sherman family type, from the M4A4, M4A2, M3 Lee, standard M4. If you have a Sherman power in a vehicle and need a filler cap, ECA is definitely the place to check out. The components are fully detailed, again, both inner and outer. We have here the actual filler cap detail itself. This thing is as true to the form as the real one I can humanly possibly make. The only difference is that the cap is rendered closed as opposed to making it function. Yes, I know I am a slacker, but you have the fasteners here for the fuel tank gasket right over there, integrally printed on, and the only thing that's not found on the table right now that is supplied is actually a piece of wire that's used to achieve the detailing of the metal wire that's used to twist and get these things on and off. On the cap itself, it is hollow underneath, which we will see as I assemble them. And we do have the retention pins, the hinges, and also the chain retention loop sections integrally present. Also included with these sets that's not seen is a length of chain, which you will again see as the video progresses. And while on the topic of the filler covers, takes us to the filler cover sidekick, which is another detail component that's going to be mounted to the model at this time, which is the ECA 3D printed fluid identification plate set. And needless to say, this is another one of those items that have been on the catalog for quite some time that I'm finally getting the chance to use on this build. This set here also retired one of those older cast resin sets that were similar to this that were on the catalog during the late 2000s into the 2010s timeframe. So the 3D printed one was a nice leg up from that counterpart. The set contains the labels over here that IDs the type of fuel and fluids that are being poured into the various fuel caps found on the rear engine deck. Obviously, we have 2 sets here for gasoline, for water, oil, and also we have a premix, which is gas oil, and it's 26 liters. This set here is intended for use primarily on the Sherman family of vehicles, specifically ones with the gasoline-powered engines, so the M4, M4A3, and the M4A4. If you are working on, say, an M4A2 or an M10 tank destroyer, then this set here would not be suitable because those ones were diesel-powered, and obviously the label here is for gasoline. You have enough on hand to equip 1 Sherman tank. As for the extra oils and waters, those would be more for like an early production M4A3 where it did have dual spouts for that. However, for a late production M4A3 like this one over here, only one of the water will be utilized and the oils are just spare. And while on the about time I get to use something on my Model for Once bandwagon takes us to the M4A3 rear folding rack. And this particular unit here is the current production variant of the ECA 3D printed rear folding rack set. The rear folding rack has been on the ECA catalog literally since I first started the 1/6 scale Sherman catalog page back in 2004, and has went through several iterations. The previous generations were all made out of sheet metal, from Gen 1 in 04 to Gen 2 in 05, Gen 3 in 2009 or so, and then eventually that was retired with the 3D printed set that we have here back, I want to say 2019 or so. So it's been a little while since I had this set and retired the old one, but again, there was a good reason to do so. Even though some people out there are clamoring that the metal ones, or metal anything, is better by definition, well, not really. This one here is truly better than the metal one, basically every measurable metric. The details are finer, the geometry is better. There's just some things that are more easily done in print as opposed to trying to work with sheet metal, which, yes, it is ironic because the real ones were actually sheet metal, but that's besides the point. This one here is actually built off of the patterns and templates that I used to make the old metal one. So, like with a few other sets that made the transition, this one here has its lineage with the metal ones, and it continues on, but with a much more improvements that have been made since the other ones were released. The set here is basically complete on the table. However, what is missing at this time are just some fasteners and other bits of hardware that are used to assemble things together, like the hinge pins, as well as the mounting bolts that secured us to the rear deck. But we'll see what that looks like once this thing is finally mounted to the model. So the piece is, again, all 3D printed, and this is made with the current production 3D printers that I'm using for my parts, which, again, just like with the grills, it's the same type of a resin type nylon material that mimics actually very closely the injection molded polystyrene. And the sets are all encompassing. So we have the rack, we have the hinges, we have the wing nuts, we have the bending arms, and basically the thing is ready for mounting on the ECA cleaning staves, which is something that will be mounted or added at the tail end of the build. So the rack is, right now the way we see it, is purely raw, straight from the printer. I do have to make some slight modifications with the mill in order to get these pieces ready for, well, for shipping for an order, but assembly for my own build. And I'm not really going to go into that in this video, but rest assured there are some little things that need to be adjusted by hand. When I first designed these in CAD all those years ago, let's just say it was one of the first things I did, and I actually learned quite a bit in doing CAD work since then. But outside of those little minor tweaks, what you see here is basically what you get. So the piece is going to be hinged this way, where it can fold up. You could be displayed either in the deployed or the retracted state, and it's not either or. The piece is fully functional in that regard. The piece can also hinge upward and out of the way to get access to the rear plate on the vehicle, and it also has some other fittings back here, such as the bottom out stop, which has a piece rests on the rear deck and prevents it from hinging downward. And we also have these two bend pieces over here, which are used for securing wing nuts that are used to strap this thing down, so when the vehicle's in operation, it doesn't flop around all over the place. We also have two secondary wing nuts here and here, which will be added as the construction continues, and that is actually used to secure this thing in the closed state, like this here. So again, if you're strapping, or if you have this thing in the retracted state, you could clamp it down. You don't have to worry about this thing wobbling around again when the vehicle's in operation. Another feature that the unit does have are these tie-down loops that are integrally built in. On the old ones, these have to be bent out of wire and soldered in place, and this here is a little bit neater compared to the soldered examples. And on the real unit here, these would be used for tie-down straps. So you could put jerry cans or bags or whatever back here, and you could strap it down with the necessary equipment. I'm not going to be adding that stuff on my models. I never add crew equipment, to some people's detriment. I hate crew equipment on models. As a side note, I hate crew equipment strapped to the side of the vehicles. It just ruins the look. It's not what I like. I don't give a crap if people use this thing as a house. It's my tank. I'm not using it as a house. I want it to tank. So screw you and your equipment. I'm not doing it. Ever. It's just not going to happen. 2 things you'll never see me do. 3 things you'll never see me do as a side tangent. 1, crew equipment. 2, winter paint jobs. I can't stand the winter time, and I'm sure as hell I'm not going to paint a model to look like one. And the third thing I'm not going to do ever on my builds, besides throwing mud on it, that's another one. The other one's battle damage. So 4 things. I cannot stand those four things on builds, and that's why you'll never see them on my models. Take it or leave it. All right, so yeah, but however, if you are the type of person that likes to strap crap to the back of the model, obviously you can do that with the provisions that are found here, and they're integrally printed on. They're nice and strong, and they will definitely be up for the task for most storage needs. And while on the rear plate details, takes us to yet another component that has been designed and added to the ECA catalog for some time, and yet is another component that I designed years ago, replaced a retired older piece, and is one that I finally get to use on one of my builds, which is the VVSS rear track racks. Again, this is going to be a common theme in this video. These sets here, I originally have had two options, or I should say two iterations listed on the catalog. Originally, these were made out of metal, and I used to bend them, solder them together, and get them to mount to the vehicle. And then those were retired, and I want to say 2008 or so, with a cast resin version, which was simpler to produce compared to the metal ones, and was also better. But those have been retired with a 3D print one, which is even better in both detailing, as well as also functionality, and more importantly, strength compared to the cast resin counterparts. And again, these ones here are production units here on the table. So the M4A3 was very distinctive with having these stamped sheet metal racks mounted to the rear of the vehicle, and they could hold 3 spare links apiece, so 6 in total. And if anyone's ever built the Tamiya one or the Tallery or even the Academy one, these things generally are a little tedious thing you have to put together and make sure they're all lined up. And that's going to be no difference on this one over here. You seriously have to make sure that they are lined up appropriately, or else it's going to throw off the look. Either way, these ones here are, again, 3D printed, and they have all of the appropriate detailing on them. So we have the appropriate geometry here of the rack itself. Note the curvature here on the real one. This is thick gauge sheet metal that's stamped into shape, so you will have the appropriate bends found on the inside and outside, which you can see here. We have weld beads integrally printed on, so no sculpting is going to be required. And unlike the resin one, no sanding is required. The resin ones, you actually had to square this off on a belt sander, which is customary for cast resin parts. On the 3D print one, nope, you just got to snip off here the little pegs, sand off with some sandpaper, and you're good to go. Over here we have this little bracket that's integrally found on this section over here, and this is actually the locking lug for the fastener and the wing nut that are used to keep this thing in place. Over here you can see the hinge work, and this here is really the biggest Achilles heel of the resin ones, where molding this into resin is a bit challenging just with the way the resin needs to flow in. These two little sections here are very thin and tend to be very frail, and were always a pain in the ass on the cast resin ones. They did work, and these are one of those things that once you assemble them, you didn't really mess with it, but either way, the cast, or I should say the 3D printed ones, are stronger compared to the older generation, which was why I retired those. Obviously, you have these pieces are duplicates, as you can see, and you have enough for one vehicle, so enough to assemble 2 racks, one for each side. In addition to the racks, we have here the actual straps themselves. The straps are also proper in their geometry to the real one, and if you look at it, you'll see it's not just a flat plate, but it's a U-channel. And here we have the hinge on the bottom, and these again were also pretty hard to cast on the previous example. I did quite a number of them, so there are floating out there. There's a few builds that people have them installed, and but here we go. Here's these ones that definitely replaced it. These ones have been again on the market now since I want to say 2019, so it's been a few years. What we also have here are the pins, as well as the wing nuts here that are used to again strap everything together. Everything is to scale, and you get everything you need right here on the sprue. The only thing that is missing is a nail or a piece of wire that's used for the actual hinging. The 3D printed ones are not really meant for that, and it's really meant for, this is really meant for just the locking mechanism, and you'll see what that looks like once assembled. But for the actual hinge itself, a little piece of wire is supplied with the sets. Continuing on with more parts are going to be mounted to this model. I wasn't kidding when I said this is going to be a somewhat long video in terms of parts usage, is the tow cable lock. This here is again a bit of equipment that's been on the catalog in one way, shape, or form since I first started the catalog. Originally, it was made out of a resin metal hybrid where the bottom was resin and the top piece was metal. I had to actually mill the piece and cut it to shape and bend it and form it and assemble it. And although that was something that I used to do, it's definitely not something I'm having time for anymore. So those were replaced eons ago, about again 2019 or 18 or so, with a 3D printed counterpart. And this here is actually the third generation, because when I first made these components, I made them in a way where they just plugged in place with no pins, and that proved to be problematic with the material that they were made in. So it was revised to the current system that we have here, where everything is actually using real pins. And this one has been in production now for a little while, and this set is also available in both standard material and printed metal. Yes, I also produce these in brass, and those are an option on the catalog in case anyone wants a stronger version for one reason or another, generally for radio controlled use. But these ones here with this material are stronger compared to the resin printed ones that were on the catalog for the years that preceded this one. Anyway, for this build over here, you can see the set that I'm using, and you get enough to assemble 2 units plus several spare pieces in case you break something. And the pieces that you get spare of are the ones that tend to be the most frail. So you do have a bit of an insurance policy. We have the clamps themselves on the bottom portion over here. They have the correct geometry. And we also have the latch mechanism, which is also, again, the correct geometry. We have these little holes, or I should say the hinge mechanisms were, again, all active. And you can see the pins right over here. And in the front section, we have eyelets with wing nuts, and as you can see, you also have several spares of those, and these get mounted in this section over here. Each Sherman tank gets 2 of these units, one in the front near the transmission cover, the other one in the back near the tail light. And on the ECA set, again, you have enough for one vehicle, plus a few extras in case you break something. Revisiting older items is fun and all, however, enough with the old, let's bring out the new, and here we have 2 brand new detail components that have been added to the ECA catalog and were designed while I was working on this build over here. And on top of that, both these items replace 2 legacy cast resin items that have been on the catalog now for in excess over 15 years. So it's about time those other items have been put out to pasture and deserve their retirement, because we have 2 brand new ones now to carry us into the years to come. Starting from the left and working our way to the right takes this little bit of equipment right over here, which is the new ECA 3D printed US AFV tow cable cleat set. I already went into the clamp mechanism before, and here we have the other half of the equation, which are the cleats. The cleats here, like I said before, replace an old school cast resin one that I originally tooled up back in 2005. So that mold has definitely had its mileage and its day in the sun, so it's time to be replaced with this set here, which is definitely an improvement in basically all ways. The first is with geometry. This piece here has far better geometry compared to the original one. It's also more to scale, I find, compared to the old legacy example. This one here was utilizing the new reference materials that I, again, learned and gained from studying the real vehicles that I went ahead and visited in person. And thanks to spy photographs, I was able to go ahead and design the set that we have here. So this set is all-encompassing, where it even has a mounting peg over here. For installation, you just drill a hole into the vehicle and just stick it in, and you're good to go. Or you can just amputate it completely and just glue it on flat. Either way will work. Me personally, I like the extra support of the stem. It just makes alignment just a little bit easier in that regard. The sets also have their weld beads integrally printed on. So again, no sculpting needs to be required on this, as opposed to the old school one, which, yeah, you have to go ahead and etch the little weld beads and sculpt that, which, again, one less tedious task that you have to worry about. The other thing to mention is the geometry of the piece. I like the way it has that distinctive cutout on either side. And this will definitely look awesome once fitted in place. Right now, these pieces are made out of a resin 3D print, so it has high fidelity to it. However, if anyone wants to actually secure a real metal cable to the vehicle, that can be done, but I would recommend not using resin for that. More than likely, that would be best if I go ahead and 3D print these out of metal, which is something that is currently not offered on the catalog. But, as I often mention, if anyone is interested in having a set made in a printed metal type material, feel free to contact me through the email address listed below, info@eastcoastarmory.com, as one of these sets could definitely make the transition. Back to the set that we have here, the one last thing I want to mention is that we have 3 units present on the set when only 2 are needed for the vehicle. The tank only gets 2. No more, no less. The reason for the third one is quite simply put, it's a spare. In case there is a mishap or a Murphy's Law type situation, don't sweat it, you have an extra one ready to go on tap. This brings us to the next new detail component, which is both awesome and disappointing at the same time. It's awesome because the piece came out literally perfect. However, it's disappointing in that it's only half the equation, and the other components that are needed to finish this piece off were left accidentally out by the printer, which, by the way, I went ahead and made the arrangements. He's taking care of that right now as we speak, and I will definitely have them as the build continues. But also, it's not really relevant right now anyway, because those components get fitted to this piece at the tail end of the build when the thing has already been painted and weathered anyway. Either way, no harm, no foul, and the show must go on. And as for what this component is, this, well, is the new ECA 3D printed Sherman family Kitty fire extinguisher mount. This is one of those little bits of equipment that are generally forgotten about by most builders out there. Either they overlook it or some people don't even know what it is. However, it's one of those things where if you properly paint on your builds, always ends up making the model look that much more polished as well as that much more complete in the end. As for what this is, well, it's a fire extinguisher, or it's a way to turn on a fire extinguisher. On the inside of the Sherman tank, inside the engine compartment specifically, there is a fire suppression system. And this is built into the vehicle. Remember, these things are gasoline powered, so the likelihood of a explosion with gasoline is one that is, well, fairly realistic. Well, to thwart that, the tank again has a fire suppression system. And to get access to it on the external portion of the vehicle, that's housed in this little armored box that we have here. In case for whatever reason, either during startup or during combat, the engine compartment were to spark up, you could run to the rear portion of the vehicle, grab on one of the 2 handles, yank on them, and this will in turn turn on the fire suppression system, which should hopefully douse the flames in the engine compartment and thus preventing the entire loss of the tank. Well, here we have the actual detailing for it. Like I mentioned before, the component was originally designed in 1/6 scale back in 2005 and was on the catalog literally ever since. But with the molds wearing out as they were, and also just with the abundance of references that I have for this part now, the old one has since been put out to pasture, and this one here is definitely way better in every regard. So back to the component in question. Like I stated before, it's housed in this little box that we have right here. We have this base plate right here, which would be, of course, affixed to the vehicle. Has this distinctive shape to it. And the real interesting part is right here on the front. If we go ahead and get this thing into focus, you can see the detailing here on the faceplate. So first we have the 2 mounts that would hold the handles in place, and regrettably the handles are the bit of equipment that are currently not present here on the table, but again, those pieces are on their way. On the component itself, hopefully this gets into camera, but you can see the detailing here of the fasteners, the slot screws that are used to secure the faceplate in its location. But we also have some verbiage here, and this is where this piece really stands out. So this component is made by the company Kitty, and Kitty is still with us today, and you would be surprised to know that they make, well, fire extinguishers. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So on the piece, you would have this little oval section over here on the molding, and you can see the Kitty logo right there. You also have all of the other relevant information, such as what it is, and it says fire extinguisher right there on the bottom. And then on the top, it actually has the Kitty corporate information. If it's having trouble getting on camera right here, I'll go ahead and throw a thumbnail of the CAD file right here side by side so you get to see what it looks like. However, having something nice and done in CAD is one thing. Having it actual in hand and printed is another. And the piece is printed in resin, and it has to be in order to get this level of detail fidelity to pop out. Obviously, once this component is painted and that panel line accent goes in there, it is going to shine like a Christmas tree. It's going to look absolutely gorgeous, and it's really going to bump up the detail fidelity to basically unheard of levels. This component is far superior compared to the one that's found on any 1/6 scale Sherman tank on the market, including the Dragon. The Dragon one is just a simple little box. This one here fills in the rest of the gaps. Also, on that note, on the handles, there is some verbiage as well, and those again are found on the resin 3D prints, which again, you'll see as the video series continues. But for now, this piece here is ready for prime time. And this brings us to a brand new item that has just been added to the ECA catalog, so this thing is literally hot off the press. But this item here is one that if you are a fan of the channel and fan of the catalog, should be something that looks very familiar to you, because it's a travel lock. But not just any travel lock. Specifically, this is the travel lock for the M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman tank. What makes it for the Jumbo, you may ask? Excellent question. That would involve not the top portion, but the feet. And unfortunately, this piece here is busted. I accidentally dropped on the floor when I was getting ready to film, but that doesn't matter. Nothing important broken. On the feet for the unit on the Jumbo, it is not just sitting flat on the hull like we see it on any other standard Sherman. In fact, on the Jumbo, it's elevated, and it's elevated to quite a degree. The only difference between the travel lock for the Jumbo and the travel lock for the standard Sherman is this extender piece that we have right here that the piece sits on. Essentially, the travel lock is sitting on platform shoes. Best way to describe it. It's still the standard travel lock, still use the exact same late production cast steel foot. However, it just has this hollow, bent, or pressed thick gauge steel shoe over here, and the piece is just simply welded to it, and then this is welded to the front armor plate. The reason why they went with this design is because, of course, the front armor section is thicker compared to a standard Sherman, and because of that, apparently they need the standoff in order for the piece to clamp onto the 75 in a better way compared to just a standard unit. It's one of the few details that are found on the front portion of the hull. On these Jumbos, they're pretty barren. There's no like headlights or brush guards or anything like that. Basically what we have is the travel lock, the hooks, and the MG. So it's very barren, but it's part of the charm on Jumbos. Back to the set that we have here. Obviously, like I stated before, everything else outside of the feet are identical to the standard Sherman. So the unit has the correct geometry to it. As I mentioned in the other video, I was able to do a direct trace off of a real late production M4A3. I had the opportunity on visiting and doing a complete and thorough detail analysis on it and measurements and all that fun stuff. It has everything as a single print, so basically it's ready to go from the get-go. You don't have to do any sub-assemblies in terms of like gluing parts on to make sure that the hinges are operable, nothing like that. Not like the older gen ones that I originally had in the catalog. These ones here, they're basically just drop-in type installation. We have here the two lugs that clamp onto the barrel. We even have the locking mechanism here, and all of this is designed to be functional. The only other difference besides the platform shoes here for the feet is an extender on the clasp. On the travel lock, in order to keep this thing in place and prevent it from flopping around when the vehicle's in operation, there is a spring-loaded clasp right over here, and it locks it in place. And because the feet are on platform shoes, this thing needed an elevator as well. And you can see that we have the bracket over here, and we have the elevating plate detailing integrally printed on. It's one piece, no other fiddling needs to be done by the builder. The piece does have its weld beads integrally printed on, and the weld beads are present on the bracket that's supposed to simulate it being welded to the front, and you can also hopefully see it right here where the bracket is welded to the extender. Outside of that, it is completely identical. The only other thing I do want to mention is that the Jumbo had technically two types of travel locks that were fitted. This here is the wartime version, but the post-war single clasp version was also used on the Jumbo. However, obviously this was done post-World War II and wouldn't be appropriate for this model over here that I'm rendering it as a World War II example. However, I could more likely, and I might as well go ahead and just tool up that version as well. It's literally the exact same CAD file, just with the addition of the elevated parts that I mentioned before. Outside of that, it's going to be really interesting finally getting one of these pieces again assembled and fitted to my model. while focusing on the rear engine deck section brings us some more new details added to the ECA catalog and are going to be added to this build. And this one here is fresh off the presses and fresh from the printer. And this is the new ECA M4A3 Sherman rear engine deck fastener detail set. Basically, again, the name is exactly what it does. On the rear portion of the Sherman engine deck, there are lots of fasteners that are used to secure the engine deck plate to the hull itself. And these details are obviously quite important, and in the past I would utilize different type of fasteners, either either M3 hex bolts or 2x56 small brass fasteners. And even though I have used both of those in the past, they both are not ideal. The M3s are, in my opinion, just slightly too large, and these other fasteners, the 2x56 fasteners, are too small. So I needed to come up with something in the middle, and finding an over-the-shelf or an off-the-shelf type fastener is just not one that's produced in that size. So I just went ahead, hit the drawing board, hit CAD, and 3D printed the set that we have here. The components are all 3D printed. These ones here are HD resin 3D print, and they are more than enough on this set over here to outfit the entire rear section of an M4A3 Sherman. Not only will this work on an M4A3 Sherman, but will basically work on all Sherman and Sherman derivative types, from the Priest to the Lee to the standard M4, M4A2, M4A4. Basically, every Sherman would get a set like this for outfitting the rear engine deck section. And before you guys are thinking that this is turning into a new product announcement video, it is not. This is the last new part that I just want to mention before I go ahead and start mounting stuff to the actual model itself. This here is the ECA M4 Sherman family periscope set. And this is one of those sets that, again, has been on the catalog for some time now, in 3D print no less. It replaced a cast resin component that was much older. And on top of that, it's the first time I get a chance to use one of these again on one of my builds. But another layer I want to add is that this set here has been redesigned for use with my current 3D printing vendor. You see, when these sets were first designed, I originally had them 3D printed in a translucent resin material, and all three of the periscopes were rendered in that format. However, since I switched over to the vendor that I'm currently using, I now have the piece optimized where the two closed units here are 3D printed in a HD resin material, while the open periscope is 3D printed in a translucent material. And this doesn't, by the way, does not affect the cost whatsoever. Same exact cost, nothing changed. You get the same quality of parts. It's just that now there are two different materials just to optimize the materials that I have offered. So, also, the other ones were all on a single runner. Now there are three separate parts, so you don't even have to do any deburring. All right, so they have that going for you. As for the sets themselves, these two units here are represented in the closed position, and these two were intended for use on the bow section of the Sherman. On all Sherman family of vehicles, regardless if it's an M4 to an M4A4, M4A3, and A2 and A1 for that matter in between, they all feature a backup set of periscopes in front of the two bow hatches. And these are hardly ever used, but they are still present on the vehicle, and they're usually found in the closed position as we see here. The third one here in the open position is to replicate the gunner's periscope that's on the turret. So this one here is not going to be fitted on the model in this video, but rest assured, as the project continues to barrel ahead, this one here will eventually be fitted in place, and we'll see what that looks like at that time. However, as for the set itself, starting with the two closed units, you can see that the piece has the appropriate geometry here of the closed periscope. It is a very flat stamped sheet metal type appearance on the top cover plate. We have here a hinge pin with two springs found in the corner sections. Springs, of course, are used to keep this thing in the closed position, and when a periscope gets inserted in place, it opens up, but there's always downward force placed by the springs on the lid itself, so that when the periscope is pulled back into the vehicle, the piece automatically closes on itself. Nothing really much going on over here. Like I said before, these are printed flat, so no sanding is required. Things are ready for installation straight from the bag. On the turret gunner's optic, it basically is the same shutter as the two bow ones. However, you can see that this one here is just replicating it in the open position. This one here has the periscope prism details present. We have those fasteners that would be found on the real unit, as well as the prism itself. Because this piece is open, that's why I rendered it in the translucent type material, so that when you paint the unit, you paint all around it, and this will give you some very realistic results of having the center portion left in its clear material, and it will give a good illusion that it has a actual prism present. This is far better, in my opinion, compared to trying to replicate prism glass with going with, say, gloss black like I do on my smaller scale builds, and like I've done in builds in the past. Or some people like to use blue. Silver is definitely an awful color to paint any prism, no matter what scale. But either way, when you have the option to roll with clear, it definitely gives you a nice little detail edge compared to trying to roll with an opaque material that's painted with some kind of a gloss agent to replicate the glass. After a minute or two, the unit gets fully assembled. The piece goes together extremely quickly, and there's not really a whole lot of parts that go into the piece, yet the piece is not only fully functional, but also properly detailed as well. So here you can see the A-frame. Right now, all of the pieces are hinged together, but they're not yet permanently glued on. This is done because from here, I'm actually going to go ahead and thoroughly prime and paint the unit. So when I install it onto the model, it'll have a thorough coat of paint on it, and I don't have to worry about any missed spots later on during the construction. You can see the platform shoes, how they pivot. Obviously, once the piece is mounted to the hull, the piece can freely actuate. Also, you can see how the top lock mechanism is also fully functional. You would take the barrel and then just lower it, and it just clamps into the section like this. And that leads us now to the rear locking system, where to lock it in place, you push this little bar upward. And once this is in the upper position, the piece is... Oops, hang on. Help if everything is all pushed together. Once the lock is in the upper position, it literally prevents the piece from swinging open, just with the geometry here of the wedge. And then to open up again, you just pull on this eyelet, and then the piece can swing open once more. On the... Like I said, the thing's not yet pinned together permanently, but on the later production one, or I should say the post-World War II one, the provisions are still here for the lockup, but they were converted with the screw type system, but that's a topic for another video for another. And that's all there is to mention about the travel lock itself, and this takes us now to the travel lock, best way to put it. Actually, it's a retention latch. So you can see that the latch are two separate parts, like I mentioned before, and when you pin the piece together, it does have functionality to it. The pin here is only temporarily put in place because I am going to take this thing apart again to thoroughly prime and paint it, but you get an idea on how the piece can function at this point. Also, you can see here I fabricated the retention spring, which is used to bounce the piece back. The spring is not formed on the sets, or at least they haven't for some time. I just give you a little piece of wire and you can form it yourself. As for how the piece is bent, well, I go ahead and free the piece here, and there you can see the spring mechanism. And so we have these two little feet here. This one's a little bent. There we go. We have those two little feet, and these guys here plug into these two cutouts here found on the latch itself, or on the hinge. They wrap around the two protruding sections here on the latch, and then it goes and wraps around the back portion that we have here, only to wrap around back on the opposite side. And once the unit is fitted in place, it fits right in nice and snug. And the piece does have some springing capability to it. This wire here is just standard floor wire. It's not spring steel, so the piece is not a full proper spring, but it does give you a little bit of spring tension, and the detailing is, of course, appropriate for this piece. And with this detailing on it, it really completes the look. You don't have to add it. A lot of people I know just omitted it just for simplicity, but if you want to take it to the next level, yeah, you can go ahead and fabricate the spring like I showed over here. As for how I did the coils, I actually used a drill bit. The bit itself is a 3/16 bit, and I basically just wrap the wire around the smooth portion here of the bit in order to form the shape. You could use a dowel rod or any other type of round object that's the same size to do the same procedure. And once the piece is all bent up, like you see here, you're basically at that point good to go. Bouncing back to the rear rack, here you can see what it looks like fully assembled. Just like with the other parts, this went together in practically no time. The piece all hinges together in the appropriate manner. And once everything is fully assembled, it will actually fold up like you see here. As for what these two little stems are, I'll get that in a second. But as you can see, the piece can freely open and close without any sort of complications. The unit will also hinge at these portions here, as I mentioned before, and that is to flip it up to get to the rear hull area of the vehicle. But again, more on that is to come. On the arms, the one design feature that it has are these limiters that are built into the one arm itself, and you can see how it bends inward. On the real one, of course, this would just be a piece of sheet metal that would be stamped and bent into shape. But you can see that the detailing, again, is brought into the ECA one, and it does do its job and does prevent it from over opening. As for what these two little fellows are here, as I mentioned before, these are used to tie the strap closed in the closed state, and we would have these wing nuts over here that would thread on, and once you tighten them down, the piece is not going anywhere. I do need to shorten them. They are somewhat longer than they need to be, but obviously this is something that's very easily done with a pair of snips. I'm going to go ahead and do this after the unit is painted and when the wing nuts are fitted in place. On the stave mount, the fastener again is also fully functional. And by functional, I mean there's no threads on it, but you can have the ability to remove the wing nut here, and the piece can swing open. Now you have access to the cleaning staves. On the real unit, this piece here can actually pivot inside, and the detailing is there, but the piece is static in this position. This was just done for ease of manufacture, and this is not something I plan on changing anytime soon, but again, the way we see it on the model here is more than suffice for the job at hand. As for these units over here, these guys are going to be fastened to the rear of the hull, and this is what secures this thing again in place over here and prevents it from wobbling around when in operation. The only thing missing on these are the weld beads. I didn't really sculpt weld beads on these sections here as much as I do now. Oddly enough, I did it on the rack, but I didn't do it to these sections. Perhaps it's something I may upgrade in the future, but for now, the way it is going to be alright for the next foreseeable future. The components themselves, as you can see, have these wing nuts over here. However, these are not the original wing nuts that are found on the runner. These ones here are just way too large. I'm not sure how that happened when I was doing the design work. These ones here, must have made a mistake with the scaling, and these pieces are a bit larger than they need to be. However, this set will contain scale size ones, and I have been supplying these with the units that have been in production now for the last 2 years or so. As a side note, if you out there are one of the customers that have one of the original units without the smaller wing nuts, hit me up. I'll gladly go ahead and clip you some and send them to you with no problems. So just hit me up with the email address, info@eastcoastarmory.com, and I'll gladly go ahead and take care of you guys. And this brings us to the rear racks. Again, these went together ridiculously quick. There's not really a whole lot going on here. However, one thing I do want to mention is with the fastener assembly. And this is one of those little details that almost nobody talks about. So on the piece themselves, the arms are held in the closed state with this wing nut and a fastener. And at quick glance, you might think, oh, well, the fastener is just built into this piece over here, and you just remove the nut and the piece can swing open. And that is not the case. On the real unit here, the fastener is actually a floating piece where it's not permanently mounted to the rack itself, and it's totally removable. So what I mean by that is if I go ahead and loosen the wing nut here, unlock the piece, and you can see how it hinges open. As we saw before, here's the locking mechanism, and it's just an open U channel of steel right over here. And the way this works is that the fastener is basically contained here on the mounting strap. So you would secure your 3 track links into these sections over here, swing this guy up, and then you just basically pivot this guy like this until he slips over. And then on the real one, you just crank down on the wing nut here. And once it's at a certain point, it eats up the space and it keeps the arm in the secure position. Again, one of those little features that no one really talks about or even knows about, but it is present on the real one, and it is also present on the ECA counterpart. Well, as it turns out, while the fire extinguisher box and the model was going through its paint and primer, Santa Claus showed up a bit early with a shipment of much needed 3D printed parts, of which are the T-handles that were absent in the previous scene. Also, yes, you can probably tell from my fingernails that I have been painting and priming the model with the colors that are going to be used, but let's go ahead and pay attention to the parts. So, The parts came in. However, before I do, you can see that the fire extinguisher box itself has going through its primer and paint. And now that it's painted, hopefully the information is far more legible compared to the way we had it before. As well as those other subtle details are now probably jumping out in better, well, in better light. All right, so with that out of the way, we can now look at the runner here for the fire extinguisher handles themselves. So you can see they have the correct shape and size to them, and written in the middle portions over here is actually some information. It's not going to be able to be all that legible or visible right now with the piece in its natural color, but once it gets its primer and its paint on it, it'll definitely become something that you will be able to appreciate more as the video continues. However, as for the piece, it is the same HD 3D printed resin that the fire extinguisher was made in, so you're going to see the same quality of detailing and fidelity on the surface. Also, you'll notice that there are 4 of these handles present. Only 2 are needed on the set. The other 2 are just for use in case of a why not or an emergency type of situation where you accidentally break or possibly lose one. If that happens to you, you have 2 ready to go on tap without the need to pull your hair out of your head. Or if you play your cards right, you could probably save these and use them for a different project. Whatever, that's up to you. Either way, this set here is now going to be primed, and I'll go ahead and throw some nice, beautiful red on it for good measure. Skipping along brings us back to the tow cable locks. Here you can see what they look like in their assembled position. As I mentioned before, these go together very, very quickly and pretty much effortlessly. They all hinge together. If I go ahead and hold the piece here, you can see what it looks like in its completed state. And if I just go ahead and pivot this out of the way, you can see how the piece can hinge open without any issues. The wing nut slips on quite loose at the moment. However, once the unit gets some layers of paint built up on it, it's going to stiffen up the tolerances and the piece will not slide off as nearly as easily as we saw just now. And this, by the way, is again pretty much done for by design. And needless to say, these detail components are going to do wonders once mounted to the model. And as for how they get fitted and what needs to be done to the model to get them to be fitted, well, this information is going to be posted on the next project update video, which is a perfect point to end this project update video for my 1/6 scale M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/6 scale project update videos like this one over here, or my other type of content being smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have more photographs of this particular build that have been posted since the project start, as well as photographs of the other larger and smaller scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, and I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. See you there.